Well, this review will be a little weird from the other reviews of Ahsoka. I want to take a perspective from the Buffy fandom, and I'm going to say something controversial, and I may lose some people, but I try to be honest in these reviews. And again, Buffy has always been a little troublesome in terms of judging its quality. Some people really love the final season, some people really love the early seasons. There's always going to be a back and forth on when Buffy was the best, when Buffy was the worst. But for me, one consistent dilemma has always been that Buffy herself, I want to stress Buffy, not Sarah Michelle Gellar, was kind of boring. If you look at her story in totality, it's a very bland, chosen one narrative. There's not much else to it. And that brings us to Ahsoka, which seems to suffer the same dilemma that the central character is fine, but she is kind of boring. But this is where Buffy was great, and Ahsoka is not yet showing its great, namely the supporting cast. And I would hone in on the obvious people. Willow, Spike, they really do a lot for the Buffy story. In retrospect, Willow's story is much more compelling. It's much more interesting. The way she transforms is much more interesting to watch. And because she's such a constant presence, that really helps out. There's also Faith, of course, because she was very strong in a few episodes. I think she's a little weaker in some episodes than people realize, but overall, she was very interesting as well. And Ahsoka doesn't really have that. I think what really sticks out is, yes, this is a very female-oriented cast, but in Buffy, that's not too bad. It's not a fatal problem because, again, the characters are so distinct that you can concentrate on them as characters. But with Ahsoka, it is very noticeable that it is mainly a female cast, but the characters do stick out with some differences. Ahsoka is stoic. The other characters are sort of taking their roles. One is very snarky, another is much more cautious, so on and so forth. But beyond very generic differences, it's not much else. Even if you knew the characters more in depth, and I admit I'm more of a new fan to Ahsoka than other people, but I did recognize a lot of callbacks, a lot of allusions. It does feel like there's a lack of urgency. So the main plot really can't be spoiled too much because it's very plain. It's just they found a thing to find Thrawn, who's potentially a very interesting villain. That's about it. The only really strong parts were her and the droids. The dialogue with them was interesting, and technically those are, I guess, male characters. And the villains do seem potentially very interesting and compelling, but we need a little bit more with them. So overall, it's not a bad start. I'm giving each episode an 8 out of 10, but I am fearful we're going down the path of Buffy Season 1. And if that's the case, that would still be pretty good. I mean, 8 out of 10 is a pretty strong score. However, Buffy was really saved at the end by having much more interesting characters around her. When the focus moves away from her to these other characters, I think it really balanced itself out beautifully. But if we're just going to be spending time with Ahsoka and her very bland, stoic pose, that may get tiresome beyond a certain point. So far, it's too early to tell, so maybe they're on the path to the later seasons of Buffy, but it could just be Buffy Season 1, and that would be disappointing given the potential they have with this series.
Powerful than all of them combined. So I say we change